Hello, welcome to my channel, Life After Cult. I'm Erica, and I'm going to dive into a story that I'm currently working on a project for to heal from. And that is the story of mine and my husband, our dating, leading up to our wedding, and our wedding. I think this is one of the biggest areas in my after cult life that I didn't address for a very long time. I didn't want to admit how much trauma was rolled up into what began the happiest years of my life. My husband Matt is incredible, and we're coming up on a pretty significant anniversary, and we just wanted to live our life, and we wanted to grow our life together. And the trauma that led up to it wasn't something that we wanted to focus on. We wanted to focus on us and moving forward. Unfortunately, it has come back a lot. And here's a couple areas. So I have, within the last couple of years, I've destroyed my wedding album. And I know that some people may raise their eyebrows at that. I can recreate it. I have it, the album itself is a scrapbooking album, and I still have all of the base pages, and I can re-scrapbook it with what I want to put in there. I spent weeks after we got married working on getting it together before our oldest child was born, because I knew once he came, it would be a lot more difficult for me to tackle something like that. And, you know, having escaped so recently and still having not made any type of sense of what my childhood was or what happened or all of the trauma associated with it, I just made the album the way that any normal person would do. So, you know, I have the page with pictures of my parents and family pictures and father-daughter dance that really ended up being a dance, but I digress. But it was all there, and every time I went to go open the album, I couldn't bear to. They were too interwoven into it, and knowing what they did to me leading up to that and that day, it was a picture of this amazing happy family that doesn't exist. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And as my kids have started getting bigger, particularly my daughter, she wanted to look at it, and I couldn't bear to show it to her. They don't have those grandparents in their life for obvious reasons. And so, you know, trying to explain that, it just wasn't working. So I completely ripped up the album, and I have all of the pictures digitally. I can still go back and recreate it the way I want to with the pictures that I want in there at another time. Not right now. But another area in which this was rearing its head was in my actual wedding gown. So I'm gonna put the finished video for this when I'm done with it and remaking it on my sewing channel. But I'm remaking my wedding gown because I made my wedding gown. It was a dream long ago, long before it was a dream from a long time ago. I don't really know how to... There's a period in our lives that I call, in my life, that I call the before. And while my parents joined ATI, and I started with those wisdom booklets in K5, they joined before that, there still was a time period that I remember bits and pieces and fragments of before the cult mindset had really trickled in. And we had very, you know, my parents didn't really get involved in what my sister and I and brother played unless there was a fight. but I don't remember anything being bad. And I fell in love with sewing before that. And I would go to my grandmother's house and I would see the gallery of wedding photos of all my aunts and uncles and my parents all the way down the hall. And of course, being a little girl, obsessed with princesses and fairy tales, you know, as these gorgeous dresses, and I thought my mom was beautiful and all of these things. And so I just knew I wanted to make my own, and I did end up doing so. And I am very, very proud of the dress that, as I was able to make it at that time. However, that dress also now contained a lot of trauma and negative associations, and I figured that out when my daughter mentioned in passing that she would absolutely love to have it one day, and I got physically ill almost immediately. And I was like, no, you're not, I don't want to give it to you. Like, my brain was, there's too much pain. You can't have it. I want to take you wedding dress shopping. I want to have that experience with you in a normal setting. I don't want you to wear a dress that has so much pain associated. But to her, it was the dress I married her daddy in. And it's the dress that I made. And so she doesn't have that. So Matt and I tried to come up with a plan to redeem that. And I feel like redemption is extremely key in a lot of my parenting, my marriage. I still follow God, not in any way, shape, or form how I was raised, but I don't know how else without that redemption I would be able to move forward sometimes with the level of pain and trauma that I do have. And one of those areas that I know it will be redeemed in some way, there's no way to go back and make anything good come out of the horrificness that was my childhood. But part of that is starting this channel. Part of that is telling my story. I want to help. I want to be there for others. I want to show people that they're not alone. I want the church to realize what they're doing and how they're allowing things to happen. And I want to see change. And, I believe that light needs to be shed. So on the part of my wedding dress, so we're going to renew our vows. I'm not sure how or when. It's not going to be cheap, so we'll have to save up for it and figure that out. But I am remaking my gown, and I'm very excited about it. So it will still technically be the gown, but not the gown that has so much pain. And I had the leftover bridal satin from me making it all of those years ago to redo the bodice. The skirt is pretty much the same, so I did rip out all of the seams and then put them back together better so that it will hold together better, because my sewing has definitely improved in the last 15 years. And I'll put that whole process in a fun sewing video on my sewing channel. But that is the plan for the dress right now, and I wanted to start down a couple of videos telling the story of why. And so I posted a 3-parter on my blog about our story, and I feel like now is a good time, because this channel I want to focus on, yes, what was done in my childhood and the abuse that I suffered will obviously be here. But I think my biggest goal is in how that's affected me post leaving, and what I've done and what I found helpful, and maybe hopefully being helpful to someone else who's just getting out or feels like they're lost or alone. And yeah, so this is a good place to start. So this is part 1, the story of us. When Matt and I got married, we couldn't afford to record it, but weren't really concerned. I don't really know when it became a thing anyway. About a week before our wedding, though, Matt got the brilliant idea to use his video camera and stick it on a tripod and see what we got. The tape got labeled and stuck in the safe with plans to do something with it soon. But life happened. Fast forward 11 years, and he finally got it on his computer. We sat down and started watching it, but I was wholly unprepared for the wash of mixed emotions that flooded. There are plenty of things that make us laugh about that day, but in truth, much of my mindset through that day was constantly reminding myself that the important thing was Matt and I would be married by the end of it, and I would be able to walk away. But I'm going to have to go back to the beginning before I get there, the beginning of our relationship. We met at church. It was the church I was born into and had in recent years to this become a popular church for many of the students from a local Bible college where Matt attended. I had recently returned from 3 rough semesters at a very conservative Christian college in Pensacola, Florida, where I had slowly come to realize that I had just traded one prison for another. I really wasn't even planning on going back to that church, simply because when I had last been there, there was not a good ministry or group geared toward college and career young adult age. I met with the man who would be my Sunday school teacher and someone I had known for my entire life. And he assured me that things had changed. There was a new leader, he told me. This new leader would end up being a really good friend and older brother to me and would be the one that would marry Matt and I. He also made an interesting point that stuck out to me. I wasn't sure why at the time, but looking back now, Matt and I are pretty sure that he was attempting some sly matchmaking. He said, "There's this young man in my class, and he's very intelligent, and he's always asking great questions. His name is Matt, and I'm pretty sure you two will get along." I walked away from the meeting willing to give it another try. After all, looking for a new church when this had been my church home since I was born was scary. My first Sunday trying the class happened to coincide with my older brother's last Sunday in the States before heading overseas with the military. Since he was selling his truck and wanted to drive it to church one more time, I wanted to ride in it one more time. I love trucks. So we rode together. Neither he nor I thought anything of riding to church together, sitting together in service, or walking to class together. I mean, we were siblings and had been at the church for over 21 years. Everyone knew that. Well, except those that didn't. The church had grown, but slowly enough that we didn't really think much of it till between the worship center and halfway to the class building we had been stopped 3 times with statements about how tough it must be for me being a military wife. My brother was in his dress uniform. It's funny now, but that day we were so grossed out I quickly corrected any statement. I think the 3rd time I almost shouted, "This is my brother," simultaneously with his, "This is my sister." After that, he fell back and let me get far ahead of him so that we would not enter the class together. Then we sat on opposite sides of the room as each other. Our attempt failed, though, and every single person in that room, except the teacher, still thought we were a married couple. Not only that, but they thought we were in the married couple in the middle of an epic fight because we were sitting so far apart. So there you have it. That was the first time I ever met my future husband. He thought I was married to my brother and that we were fighting. I learned all this later, though, after getting to know everyone there more and after my brother was gone. My first thought of Matt came as we were all introducing ourselves. I remember thinking, "Oh, that's who so-and-so was telling me about. He looks like a geek." Yep, that was my first impression of my future husband. The next few weeks are fuzzy in the memory department. I was doing everything in my power to never be at my parents' house, which is where I was still living, unfortunately. I was working as many hours as my manager at the bookstore would give me, throwing myself into my new social life and doing my best to stay out of my parents' crosshairs. We were doing all kinds of things as a college group, and I was enjoying every bit of it. It was the most freedom I had ever experienced before. Within about a month, though, it became super obvious to me and everyone else that Matt was interested in me. He swears he was being subtle, but it was anything but. I feel fairly certain that most that knew us both then would agree with that. It felt weird. I was about to turn 21 and had never known of anyone interested in me before this. I mean, I thought he was nice, but I still thought he was a geek and that he wasn't my type. On top of that, I wasn't looking for a husband. At least not there, at my church. I had put a hope on one particular individual whom I had known for most of my life, and his family had homeschooled as well. Having been raised in that, I thought that me marrying someone else that had been homeschooled would be the most logical as well as simple thing. Any man that had been homeschooled would surely understand me better, and that I was supposed to homeschool any future children. As there is a possibility for him, or those that know him to read this, I'm not giving any more details, as I don't want to make anyone feel awkward. Just suffice it to say that I had hard crushed on this man for years. I had never breathed a word of it to anyone save my sister, since I was taught that that was sinful, and by having a crush, I was giving a part of my heart away. So yes, emotions were all over the place once it became obvious Matt was interested. I certainly was flattered, but was clinging to other hopes. God knew better than I did, obviously, and slowly but surely I was able to release my dream and move forward. Matt and I didn't start dating right away. I would have been too terrified to go on a date even if he had asked me at that point. But he walked across the parking lot at church one Sunday just as I was about to leave to say, "Just see you later." I think it was about 3 hours and one bad sunburn later that I finally got in my car and left. Thus began a tradition for us that would last until I moved out of my parents' house. He would walk me to my car after church, and we would then spend an ungodly amount of hours standing next to it talking. We didn't mean for it to turn into a thing, it just kind of did. That carried over to any time our group got together for a Bible study or a social event. One event that we both went to met downtown, and we spent so many nights after that just walking around till 2 or 3 a.m. Probably wasn't the safest thing we could have done, but it is what it is. But my parents are not dumb and figured out quite quickly that something was going on with a young man. They tried everything to shame me introducing Matt to them so that they could tell him to leave. They made it quite clear that I was going about this in a rebellious way, as Matt had not spoken to Dad first and gotten his permission to even talk to me. There was no way in the world, though, that I was letting them get anywhere near Matt at this point. We weren't even officially together yet. But home turned miserable again. I came home late one night to Dad waiting for me at the door with a full lecture about how I was being rebellious and they were going to put me on a curfew. I was paying full rent for my room. And take my driver's license and my car. Remember, I was now 21, paying rent, had paid cash for my car, and was paying my own bills. This was the first time I ever worked up the nerve to stand up to them, but I literally laughed in his face, then proceeded to remind him that the car was mine, I was an adult, and I would go to the police if he laid a hands on my driver's license. He was furious, but I guess figured I was right, so he just kicked me out of the house for a couple of nights. I ended up having to spend more of my own money to get a hotel room. The same amount of rent was required the next time, though. I had been wanting to move out, but really didn't think I could afford to. This set the ball rolling, though. I had to get out. It was only a matter of time before I would come home to the locks having been changed and my stuff in the yard. They continually threatened it for such a rebellious daughter. Other than excluding them from my relationship with Matt, though, I was doing everything they demanded of me. At our next get-together, I pulled our leader aside and begged him to help me find a place and some roommates. I had no clue where to start on my own. It took some time, and Matt and I officially started dating before he found somewhere, but he found me a place with 3 young ladies. The day I moved, I took everything. Mom suddenly got very helpful and sweet and offered to keep any of my things I didn't need yet. There was zero chance of me taking her up on that. My parents had already destroyed most of my childhood belongings, and I knew I had no guarantees of ever seeing my things again if I left them. But so started the best time of my young adult life. For a season, anyway. So, my last video was a bit longer, and I don't want them to be ridiculously long unless they just really need to be. So I'm going to stop it there. I might put the second 2 sections together in the same video where I don't have the intro to it. But a couple of things here. The reason that they were saying that I was being rebellious in what I was doing with Matt is that in ATI, there was even contracts that they printed for fathers and daughters for us to basically sign our lives away over for our dads, saying that we wouldn't marry anyone that they didn't choose. Some families had applications that they would make men fill out, but more often than not, there was this idea of courtship where there would be some times where as the woman, you wouldn't really even know your future spouse until the wedding night. And you certainly wouldn't be alone with him before the wedding night. And compare that with lack of education for no bodily autonomy, no rights to say no because, you know, your father is your God-given authority, and then that authority is supposed to be transferred to your husband, no questions asked. Remember, we are the weaker sex, and so I feel like it should be very easy to see the setup for abuse and for marital arc. And thankfully, that wasn't my story, but it is a lot of women's out of this. And so even though I was following the absolute letter of everything that they told me to do, no matter how ridiculous it was, no matter how abusive it was, I mean, to put it in perspective, I'm not saying that people shouldn't work for what they're given, but at that time, I was working over full-time at a full-time job. I was still required to clean a substantial portion of my parents' house. I was still required to cook a portion of the meals every week. I was still expected to help tutor my younger siblings when I was home. I was dealing with consistent, "You're never here. We don't care. You're still not here enough, and you're not involved enough." If I didn't eat enough meals at the house in a week, then somehow I was being, according to my mother, she would get mad. And that was the reality of my home. And I was still paying a ridiculous amount of rent to them every month. They would still try to ransack my room and check for everything. And I was 21. And I'm not saying 21 is some magic age where if you're living at your parents' house, you get to do whatever you want. I understand. And, you know, as a mom with 5 kids, as my children reach adulthood, there's still going to be some ground rules that go with our house of, if you're going to live in our house, then this is going to be a rule that you're going to need to follow while you're here. However, in a situation of loving parents, we're not talking about ridiculous stupidities of rules. It's, you know, we want our children to succeed. So we're going to do our best to help them succeed. And in that, I don't want them to feel like they have to escape this house the second that they turn an adult. If they hit 21 and they just are still struggling to make it and they're doing what they can, I don't want them to feel like they have to leave. So when I say ground rules, you know, it's not going to be like, I am the iron-fisted ruler of this house and how dare you. And so anyway, that's the way it was for me. So, but with all of what they were doing, I was following all of it I was doing everything that they wanted me to. I was keeping my room to past perfection standards because I was afraid. I had my one little filing cabinet that I had the key to, that I put my little, I didn't want them to touch it because she would literally just go in there and ransack whenever she wanted to, whether I was there or not. And I was still cooking all meals. Even after Matt and I'll get to it, even after I did start bringing Matt over to the house, it was very infrequently, but I did want him to meet my siblings. I would get him there on nights that I was supposed to cook dinner, and we would cook dinner for the family together. And so I was still doing it. The only thing that I was doing that they didn't want me to do was I was involved with Matt without their permission and without their consent. And that peeved them to no end. And that is what stemmed to the, you are being rebellious. And, you know, I was given all types of threats of how, you know, God was going to kill Matt in a car accident or me in a car accident because I was being rebellious and I had not gone through my earthly authority figure in my father, because I was clearly making a big mistake, and my father that had abused me and tortured me for my entire childhood somehow knew better than me what I needed. And Matt didn't fit the bill. He wasn't a homeschool kid that was under his parents' thumb. He wasn't a homeschooled kid that we had known for so long, because I mentioned the young man that I had a crush on in my blog, and actually, ironically, they actually wanted me to get in a relationship with him because they had his parents 100% fooled and wrapped around their finger in a friendship. And so, you know, they couldn't control the narrative. That's the thing. And it may sound so confusing to people outside of this scenario, but when I knew I needed to get out, like, I had to get out. And so anyway, that's the start. We will pick up with part 2 in the next one.